So a client sent me this photograph and wanted to make him something special. Those candlesticks at the top are actually Hebrew symbols. So this was the slab he wanted me to make it out of. He had that from a kitchen remodel, so I was like, cool, you provide the wood, I'll do it. Well, that's what it's supposed to look like. Well, supposed to. Had lots of issues with bit slipping and some other machine problems as well. Check out this video and see how I overcame those issues by using the Vectric software to make this thing shine. Well, there's the cracks in the slab, and they needed to be fixed. Well, so I took it to my table saw and I had to clean that up. And you can see here, I went ahead and rough cut that on the bandsaw, but I needed to get that trimmed nice and straight, so used the table saw, and you can see it's so thick it wouldn't fit in one pass. So trimmed that end, and once I got through with trimming that end, I moved the fence and cleaned the other end as well. So here we go. Okay, so the client sent me this, okay, the bitmap image, and it's a very cool little piece, and it meant a lot to the client. As you can see, the base has some texture to it, almost like a leather, and the top is very smooth and tapered, and the bottom is almost rounded over a little bit on the edge. But I had a unique situation here. This piece did not trace well in the bitmap, so instead of using the bitmap layer trace, I wound up coming over here and manually tracing this. And let me just, if you'll notice, I created it. Before I show you that, I want to make sure that this was on the outermost portion of this piece, not the high part. And that was where it was getting a little screwy with the bitmap trace. It was intermingling the two. So I created a top and I created a bottom. And because I needed the top portion at a certain height and I needed the base at a certain height, and I wanted two different features added to each edge. All right. And what I wound up doing was I created a component out of the base with a 5-degree, and I created a top portion here with a 20-degree draft on it, and I wound up using a gravel feature, and the gravel features actually turned out pretty well. I laid it on there and expanded it out, and then came up here to the properties tab, and then I wound up taking everything outside of the vector and deleting everything outside of that vector. So that's how I wound up with the gravel texture on there as a profile. And I smoothed it out a little bit. It was a little bit wanky, and I tried different textures, but that's what wound up looking the best. All right. So I had my top, had my bottom, and I created my components using these two vectors. And I wound up with this. Turned out pretty well. I got my height the way I wanted it here, my base the way I wanted it here. It's got a nice little bevel. This has a little better bevel, more prominent, and as you can see, that was going to look really good. Now, this is not really part of the model itself over here. This was just a representative of the way the slab looked when I did it. So when I ran this, everything looked good until here. The bit started slipping about right here when it was doing the pass on with the 1/2-inch ball nose. Well, the problem I ran into was it came right here and slipped and put a big chunk out of this corner, and that created all kinds of problems. And obviously I couldn't leave that, and that wasn't going to work. And the original idea was this slab was going to be mounted to the wall, and this was just going to stand prominent. So it was going to look like a really nice feature piece coming off of this slab. And so because it cut here too deep, I had to create a fix for that. Well, I didn't want to redo the whole thing, but I had to do something. So my solution was to taper from here down to here. So I came into this component and went up here to the properties tab, and I wound up doing a fade, 27-degree fade from here to here, and that turned out that looked like that was going to be a really good solution. And let me just turn this to the side so you can see what that looked like. And that's, you can see a nice consistent angle. Now my fix, when I added this taper, all that did was lower that down. And that actually was going to work out pretty well. and that was a good solution. I ran that. It still didn't take off quite enough, so I came in and I lowered the whole model just a little bit and ran it again, and that fixed my problem. But for some reason, it left a weird little step all along the outside. So my solution to that was to create a little trim feature, and I came in and trimmed that out, and I tested it with a flat end mill. And the thing I was going to do is lay a piece of hardboard on here as my Z height, and then cut down the thickness of the hardboard, and that worked out perfectly with the flat end mill. But I wanted to do this with a slight little curvature here, and so I reran it with the ball nose, and that was my mistake because I forgot to set it off my Z height, and it wound up creating a little channel all the way around. Yeah, it was quite a nightmare. So that was my fault. So then I came in and created a whole pocket system, which I don't have listed here, but essentially it pocketed everything out around this. It left this exactly where it was, but it pocketed that 0.11 inch all the way out. And that worked out really good, except for there was one area that needed to be done, and when I went and did that, the bit, I forgot to set my Z properly, and it literally just plowed right through right here. So that screwed things up again. So this one was my fault. Well, that leads us to the third fix, excuse me. The third fix was, okay, we're going to completely eliminate the border piece, because at this point I had to shrink it down and it was just going to look funny. So what we came up with was, instead of a full plaque wall where this whole slab was going to be shown, we decided that this was going to be the solution. And the problem I ran into in creating this, essentially this was going to be a nice curved piece, so it looked like a smaller plaque, and then this was going to be raised, all this was going to be cut away. Well, the problem is the bit slipped again. As it was making its way around here, I did a profile pass on each layer. So after it cut away the pocket, it came in here and created a profile all the way around. Well, the bit started slipping over here, and by the time it got here, it was a ½ inch deep, and it happened right on that layer right there. And it was a ½ inch deeper than it needed to be, and that created yet another problem for me. Because at that point, I couldn't use this anymore. And this would have looked nice. Would have looked really clean, looked really good. But again, the bit slipped, so that created all kinds of problems for me. And well, yeah. So this obviously caused me issues, and I have to go back to the drawing board yet again to fix a slipped bit. This is whenever I found out my collet was bad. I guess I may have dropped the collet or something. Being a spring collet, those things are pretty sensitive, I understand. And so I bought a new collet, replaced it, and this is where we came up with this. I kept the same basic design, lowered it down, but instead of having the radiused edge, I took this original model and created a bevel that ended up looking like this, which was the end result. So I took the original model, lowered it down to thickness to get the thickness where I needed it, and I created a heavier chamfer on the edge, still keeping the same bevel on the top portion. And instead of cutting out around these fingers, because this slab was gnarly curly and was going to create problems if I were to cut these away, there was a split running up through here that came up through here. And so this is the end result, which is the beveled portion. Nice bevel here. Left this in between as solid, and that turned out very, very well, I think. And the end result, as you can see here. So the idea is, no matter what you do, when you're dealing with Vectric and you're dealing with machines, when you run into problems, you know, I wanted to just give up after the second time, but I couldn't. I had to keep going back to the drawing board and find solutions to this. And the beauty of having the Vectric is I have all these files now with all these things in it, And if I were to come up here and show you, this one's not too bad. But if I come over here and showed you this one, I have so many layers and so many models that just aren't used because I wound up having to fix all these little issues, and none of them were going to fix it. Each solution I came up with was a matter of trial and error in the system. The preview showed me everything I needed to see, and I was able to finally come up with this end result, which I think looks really nice. Now, in comparison to the original where this whole slab was going to be used and mounted on the wall, I think it turned out well. And honestly, the client's original request was for all of these candle pieces to be freely cut out, but there was just no way that could happen on the slab. It was just too warped, too bowed, and too many cracks. So I think this solution ended up getting us the closest to what the client originally wanted, and it turned out pretty dang well. He likes it so much, he decided that the client decided he wasn't going to hang it on the wall anymore. He wanted to lay it on a table and have it stand up. Well, this is where we came to where we are now. I had to come up with another solution. Obviously, the client made the change, but he made the change based on all of the other problems that I had. So I took this off of the machine, and I ran this on my table saw and cut this perfectly flat right here, and made a base out of some of the cutoff material that was left over from the cutoff. So huge project, lots and lots of problems, and I probably have 20 hours of just cut time on this thing because of all the problems that occurred. None of the problems happened early in the cut stage. So this is it, the final result. And again, when you run into problems, go back in, sit down, think about it, come up with solutions. The Vectric software is amazing, and it allows for a lot of different trial and error, and anything you try, you're going to see it here. So that's the moral of the story. Don't give up. No matter how many times you fail, go back, keep trying, and get creative as possible. And it forced me to learn new techniques. It forced me to try new things. And in the Aspire is so full feature packed that there's no way I couldn't come up with a solution, and thankfully I did. So anyway, there you go. Hope that helps. And if you've got any questions about anything that you've seen here or that I did, leave me a message below, and keep trying. Don't let your failures dictate what you're going to do. You constantly update and maneuver and find new solutions to make it better.
Well, thanks for watching. Since you made it this far, I want to give you a couple of tips. One, anytime you're doing 3D contour sanding, these little cling spore sanding mops are fantastic. They get right into all the details of what you're working on, and they don't ruin any of the detail. They leave the surface super smooth and very clean. You can see those flaps just follow right into the curves and detail of that part. Well, that's the end result. After applying the Armasil satin, I think it came out amazing. The client was super stoked, and honestly I was too. I was pretty proud I was able to recover myself to get these things working again with all the problems that I had. Very happy. Leave me a comment below and tell me what your thoughts are. Maybe some tips and suggestions that I didn't think about that would have made this a lot easier to recover from all these problems. Well, look forward to hearing what you have to say, and in the meantime, this is Chris, and I will CNC you later.